I think there's a lot of providers that they don't. They think they don't have the luxury of that because they're busy putting out fires. But if you don't figure out why the fires are starting to begin with and solve the root issue, you're gonna just spin your wheels until the end of time. So I think looking forward, trusting that what you're doing is going to pay off, even if there's a short term struggle.
Hello, difference maker, and welcome to IDD Leader, the podcast that's all about helping human service organizations retain and grow their workforce using behavioral science. I am your host, Nate Beers. Let's dive in. Now, today's interview is with the newly appointed executive director of an organization, Core Services, that has been building a nationwide reputation for their outstanding delivery of person-centered services and for their amazing work with their staffing. In fact, when you hear about their current vacancy rate, your jaw might be on the floor just like mine was. But having said that, more than just admiring their work, my goal here in this interview is that you can learn nuggets of wisdom that you can immediately implement in your specific organization and in your specific context. So, difference maker, without further ado, enjoy this interview. All right, well, Nick, let's start with you. Would you introduce yourself and your role there at Core Services, and why do you choose to work in human services to begin with?
Well, my name is Nick Filarelli. I actually began my career as a DSP, like a lot of people, and had no intentions of turning it into a career, but thought it was something that sounded more fun than working in kind of menial retail jobs or factories. Fell in love with it, had a really great time, and accidentally stumbled into what would turn out to be a almost 20-year career. I worked as a program supervisor for a time. I worked as a weekend coordinator. I've done a little bit of this and that. I joined my current organization, Core Services, in 2015 as the program director. And as of last week, I assumed the role of the executive director upon retirement of our previous director, Susan Arwood.
Oh, wow. Did you know that was coming for a long time, or was that kind of a surprise, or what?
No, I sort of feel like I've been kind of groomed for the role for many years, and then we actually had a formal succession plan in place for about the last 4 or 5. So, I worked very closely with Susan. We were a tight-knit team and small organization, so I learned a lot of what she did already, so it wasn't a huge adjustment. It's maybe a little more like a mental adjustment because the pressure is kind of on me. I feel like there's no one to pass the buck on to now. So
That's right. Yeah. You're the guy now. So.
Yeah. But why do I stay in the human services field? Because I really enjoy it. It's a lot of fun, and it doesn't feel like a job. So I'm very grateful that I don't have to dread coming to work every day, and I get to see a lot of friendly faces and watch people do some amazing things.
Okay. And just to clarify, in case listeners aren't familiar with Core Services, what kinds of services do you provide?
We provide primarily residential supports to people living in either 1, 2, or 3 people in the same home. We do some community participation stuff. We do a lot of employment services. We've also branched out in the last couple years into pre-employment transition services, where we have often retired school teachers that go into the school system and help kids with disabilities look for life after high school and plan for getting a job or learning some of the life skills they're going to need after they graduate. We are also part of what Tennessee's MAPS program. It's Medicaid Alternative Pathways. It's been around for a couple years, but it's still kind of in its infancy. And that has a similar goal. You're taking young people, and rather than looking at long-term supports, you're kind of identifying milestones they need to achieve to be independent and ultimately not rely on long-term supports. So,
well, that's cool. So it sounds like you guys have been branching out more over the last little while here.
We definitely have, yeah. So what we did for a long time, the funding mechanisms are uncertain, and the future of Medicaid is a bit uncertain. So it makes a lot of sense for us financially to branch out and seek alternative revenue streams. And then there's also a lot of just really cool stuff going on in some of these more creative endeavors.
Yeah, no, that sounds really neat. Listen, I've been dying to ask you this since I first heard about and found out about core services. So I've been on a lot of provider websites. Nobody besides core services, from what I can tell, just sort of bears their soul with this detailed, what is it, like 150-page report that you guys put out each year that outlines, well, you know better than I do, but it outlines everything, right? Like your staffing stuff, your outcomes for clients, all kinds of stuff. Why on earth are you guys so comfortable putting this out?
Well, that would be our trend analysis, is what we call it. And I would say we're comfortable putting it out for a couple of reasons. Firstly, we're pretty proud of what we've done. We feel like it reflects generally positive, although we do not hide some of the areas we struggle in. That is kind of, like you said, we bare our soul in that report. So it has the good, the bad, and the ugly. But overall, I think it really reflects who we are in a positive light. So we're very proud of what we've done. And secondly, I tend to believe that people will create a scenario if you're not transparent. People will fill in the blanks. So we'd rather them have the actual information than whatever they're going to decide about us without it. We like transparency. We believe in it. We have nothing to hide. We just want to let it all out there.
Yeah, no, I think that's really valuable because there's a lot to learn from that. I wish a lot of other organizations were doing, we're putting that out there. I'm sure that kind of a analysis must be really helpful for you guys internally because you can get to see things year over year and how things are shaping up. Do you get feedback from other organizations or other people that look at that and try to in any way follow in your footsteps? I mean, what have you heard about that?
So our state agency, the Tennessee DDA, likes it a lot. They love data. Some of these other providers probably would be hesitant to have some of that information be so public. But we definitely have been approached by people that want to replicate, at least for their own internal processes, the type of data collection and the things we're measuring and how we're doing it. And as that trend analysis, it started in, I think, 2015 or 2016. So now we have almost 10 years of data to compare to. And it's really interesting in reflection to see how far we've come in terms of like staff wages have basically doubled in that time, and what our turnover rate is and our DSP vacancy rate and all those metrics that are really important to guiding the organization. We can look at it historically.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, that I could see how to be hugely valuable. And does this enter into like decision making for you guys? Are you looking at that when you're looking at your 1 year or 5 year kinds of goals, or how do you even use the data? Because I'm going to ask you some more detailed questions, but I'm curious how you use it.
Yeah, no, I think what we found is a lot of times it affirms what we've suspected, which is that if we focus on this one area, we're going to see this result. So for instance, if we focus on being person-centered towards our workforce in the same way that we preach person-centeredness towards the people we support, then we expect to see retention rates improve. And so oftentimes it kind of affirms what we suspected anyway. But I think it definitely highlights deficit areas, and that lets us know where we need to focus on. It's very thorough. Actually, I have a copy of it right here. So yeah, you mentioned it's very thick.
Yeah. No, but absolutely.
The data is very good for going through the CQL accreditation process. Tennessee has what's called the person-centered organization accreditation. So a lot of those accrediting bodies look at data, and to have it as thorough and as long-term that we have, that's very useful in kind of going through some of those accreditations and stuff, which Tennessee is one of the states that's looking at a value-based payment system in the future. So you will actually bill rates based on these criteria being met, whether you're accredited by CQL or CARF, or you have so many of your employees that are accredited in those kind of metrics. So it's very useful in that way.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I've heard, in Pennsylvania, they just started rolling that out. I think either this calendar year or this fiscal year is the first year that they're implementing that. And I think that's happening across the country in quite a few states.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely a national trend. They want to incentivize the things that we're supposed to be measuring, quality metrics that we're supposed to measure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to just ask you a couple of maybe the highlight reel or some things that have been going well. One of the things that really jumped out at me when I was looking at your data, and of course, the focus here on at IDD Leader is particularly on staff retention and staffing issues just in general. But I think I saw something like only 10% of your staff have been there for less than a year. Did I get that right?
Yep, that is correct. I think our average tenure has risen to I wrote that down, 7.2 years is the average tenure of one of our DSPs. So that's pretty impressive, I think. You don't see a lot of organizations in our field or otherwise that the average employee's been there for over 7 years. It's just kind of been a national trend towards people relocating to different jobs throughout their career. So we want to keep people. We strongly believe that the quality of our supports is directly related to the stability of our workforce. I view my entire job, and I preach to my team a lot, that our entire job is to support the DSPs to do their job. They are critical to the agency. We are not. So we focus 70% of our efforts on supporting them truly.
Can you flesh that out for me? Like, make that tangible. Give me some examples of what that looks like on the day-to-day or month-to-month.
Education. So and speaking of data, our report will show that there's a correlation between staff that have credentials, professional credentials, and more education, and them working long-term. So we've encouraged our staff to go through the NADSP e-badge program. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but it's a significant portion of our workforce is accredited through that through either the 1, 2, or 3 level. A lot of people have achieved the NADSP e-badge 3, which is the highest level that program offers. A lot of our workforce have gone through shifts employment first credential and technology first credential. So education is the main thing. Our orientation process is very thorough. So everybody coming into our agency goes through weeks and weeks, not every single day, but throughout about a 60-day time period. They're going through a whole variety of trainings and things. And that's all with the goal of making sure that they are capable of doing their job, because that directly correlates to them staying long-term and being successful.
Yeah. And what does your orientation, can you give a little bit more details on that? What do you guys, what's your secret sauce with that?
So a couple of the major things that we do is we send everybody through person-centered thinking training. It's a 2-day course, and it really just kind of lays the foundation of what it means to support somebody instead of caring for somebody, because you get a lot of DSPs that come to you from other organizations or people that have never done DSP work, and they just do not understand the difference between, what we do and what a nurse does. We're not caring for people. We are truly trying to support people to do things more independently and work and be in charge of their own lives, essentially. So we sent 100% of our workforce has gone through that. And there is also a 4-day personal outcome measures training, which uses the CQL's POM tools. And that's a little bit expensive because it is a commitment to free an employee up from their shift for 4 days, and then also to pay them for 4 days to sit through a class. But those two things, I think, have been really major and as kind of establishing our expectations for DSPs, which has led directly to them staying longer, doing a better job, and then higher quality of life for the people that we're supporting.
Okay. Yeah, that's pretty extensive training. They must enjoy it. I mean, it must be increasing buy-in if people are sticking around.
Yeah, it's a fun class. They both are. So I definitely think they enjoy it. And I think that what we found time and again is that if we just focus on making good lives for people, the rest kind of follows. I think people recognize they want to be part of something meaningful. They want to be part of something good and fun and a noble cause. So in that way, we can offer people something in a job that maybe we can't in terms of money. We can't throw money at the issue the way that some companies can. We have limited resources, but we can give people a job that's meaningful and recognize that they're doing good in people's lives. And I think they definitely appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a huge, I think that matters a lot to many people, where they feel like they're part of something that's bigger than them. And it's not just putting in time. A lot of people go to work every day and they're just putting in time for what they really want to be doing. But if you have compassionate people that are working there, which generally that's who's attracted to the field, but then you can connect that where it's not just putting in time or just caring for them, but like you said, supporting them.
We have a couple of other initiatives I wouldn't mind to share if you'd like to hear about them.
Absolutely.
So one of our goals has been to, like you said, create buy-in amongst the DSP workforce, because there's this natural tendency for a division to form between management and frontline workers. I don't know what it is, but there's just a them versus us. So we try to break that barrier down. And a couple of the ways we've done that is we've created advocacy councils. We have a core council, it's called, core services, capital CORE. What they do is they review policies for us. They will approach them with questions we have, ideas, things that we're debating on, and get their input from a DSP perspective. It's a group of about 8 DSPs. It's self-governing, so they elect their own memberships. They defined their own charter. They schedule their own meetings. They present items that are important to them, to the group to discuss, as well as things that we've asked them to look at. One of my favorite examples is we were looking at vehicle maintenance software, and it was inextricably linked to GPS tracking. You couldn't have one without the other for some reason.
Yeah.
And we knew immediately that was going to be a controversial decision, and staff were going to take issue with it. So we put that before our core council and decided whatever they recommended we were going to do, and they told us that they felt like that would undermine trust in the DSPs, and they would feel like they were being watched and all that. So we nixed that company and ended up going a totally different direction, and we do not have GPS tracking in our vehicles based on the recommendations of that group.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's a very memorable, tangible example. No, that's actually, it's really neat. I was just recently interviewed another organization. I was interviewing actually their DSP council that they had formed. It sounds very similar, although it was a newer initiative there. How long have you guys been doing yours?
Oh, 5 or 6 years at this point, I think.
Okay, so it's
been around
sounds
for
like
a while.
Pretty well established. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I want to swing back over to the report that you have there. What's your vacancies rate? I remember it was really, really low.
The average is about 3%. I will knock on wood right now, because as of today, we do not have any vacancies, which is a position we're not often in, even as low as our vacancy rate tends to be. So it's been quite low. We're very fortunate. I think that's allowed us to do a lot of the extracurricular stuff that is more difficult when you're just kind of struggling to fill shifts and paying a lot of overtime expenses and things.
What do you attribute the low vacancy to? What have you either accidentally done and it's working, or I'm sure there's intentional decisions as well, but what do you attribute that to?
So I do think that happy people equal happy staff. So I believe that we started focusing on just improving people's lives, and some of that has kind of just trickled its way down into people having fun at work and recognizing that they're doing something good, and then choosing to stay with us when they could go work at a different provider or a different job. Let's see. I think some of that is preaching person-centered practices towards our employees as much as we do towards the people we support. That involves really redefining workplace culture. When I first started, there was this rule that staff couldn't come beyond a certain point in our office. It didn't make a lot of sense. And there was a lot of that similar kind of mentalities that staff were, I don't know, less than or something. And we've tried to break down all those barriers and make staff every bit as part of a mission as the people that are working in the office and pushing the paperwork around.
Yeah, that's kind of a vivid. I'm picturing masking tape on the floor like this painted line.
It was kind of like that. It was like the staff couldn't go beyond this point, and if they did, they had to have permission. It was just it was very silly, and I think it spoke to a larger disrespect towards your frontline workforce, and it sort of totally flipping the way we view our organization, where the people we support are at the top. The staff are working directly to support them, and then our job is to support the staff.
Yeah, no, I think that's a big paradigm shift, and I think there's a lot of organizations that wrestle with that, where the way things have been done, it's maybe not working as well as they wish it was, and it has some of that. There might not be a painted line or a masking tape line on the carpet, but there's this sense of like you've said earlier, an us-them thing going on. And I'm not too surprised as I'm hearing you play this out that in tearing that down and shifting the paradigm, that then it's increased the engagement and the enjoyment, and then of course all the statistics, the good statistics that follow that.
We've also really tried to empower our staff to provide honest feedback, which I will tell you, we're at a point now where our staff are not afraid to tell us what they think. They're very critical sometimes of what we do, and we've promoted that, and we welcome that, and we make changes based on their recommendations. So we do a lot of work to reach out via surveys, anonymous surveys, satisfaction surveys. We let our workforce anonymously evaluate each of us individually. So every member of our administrative team had a survey go out to our entire agency that was like the Nick Filarelli survey, and there was 20 categories where you could rate your opinion of my job performance in that area. Like, do I listen? Am I open to new ideas? Am I respectful? Am I professional? Do I respond? Do I do what I say I'm going to do? And I can tell you that you have to have a certain self-confidence to even expose yourself that way, and you have to be good at taking criticism and using it positively rather than getting offended or upset by it. But that was super cool. I think staff liked the opportunity. They told us what they thought. I made some changes to my professional approach based on that. I still think about that report periodically. I go, this is an area I have to work on. I need to do better right now based on this feedback I got 4 years ago. Very interesting.
Yeah. Now, I'm not trying to get up in your grill, but do you mind sharing an example? Because I think that's an issue that a lot of leaders wrestle with, is how do I want to be the captain of the ship, but I also want to be in touch with the crew and kind of this. So I don't know if you're able to, or willing to share that or not, like just any example of what
I'm
got
more
pointed out, or how that's shifted your approach, like more specifically.
Yeah, well, I found out that I entirely inadvertently came across to some people as being, I don't know, arrogant or distant, or, I'm one of those people that I tend to struggle with the warm and fuzzy just because I'm so focused on the task at hand sometimes. I kind of get wrapped up in that. So I have to make a concerted effort to make sure I'm greeting people as I pass them in the hallway. I'm smiling at folks when I meet them at the door. I was giving some people the wrong impression, not meaning to, and that was eye-opening for me.
Yeah, wow, that's gutsy. I mean, really, the whole team got this feedback, you said.
Every single person, our program supervisors, the person that does our medical coordination for appointments and stuff, everybody.
Wow. Well, I commend you, and that's cool. That's so far a lot of the things you're sharing. I've been talking with different organizations that are thriving, a lot of overlap, but that's one I've never heard before. So I'm particularly excited about hearing about that. That was cool.
Yeah, I highly recommend that if you're open to hearing things that aren't necessarily easy to hear.
Yeah, and then kind of more in the day-to-day or week-to-week, if someone is seeing something that's an issue, I don't mean about like you personally per se. I just mean that there's something. How are they bringing this up? Are people they just initiate walking into the office? I know you said you had surveys, but those are probably not like every month. I mean, that's probably every here and there, right?
Yeah, we do our formal satisfaction survey a couple times a year. We do that more frequently for new people. So during somebody's first 120 days, they're going to get multiple surveys about the process and if they're happy with their shift. Because we lose a lot of people. When we lose people, it's generally during the first 6 months, less than a year is when our turnover happens. So we focused heavily on that. Speaking of using data to kind of identify deficit areas. But yeah, we have an open door policy. People are not afraid to walk in. We have an outstanding anonymous survey that people can submit. We have something called our stupid rules survey, where if you heard a rule and you thought it sounded kind of silly and nobody seems to know where it came from, you ask. And we found that maybe 8 years ago, you had a house manager that decided that this needed to happen this exact way because they wanted it that way. And it's kind of become this rule that nobody knows where it started and everybody's following it. And why is that happening? Those kind of things.
Yeah.
And then, of course, our advocacy councils are there to submit ideas and discuss issues.
Are those surveys, are they just like online that someone can take at any time? And are there like QR codes around, or how do people access those surveys?
So it's a standing survey. We use SurveyMonkey, but there's a link that's on the front page of our electronic case management system, which all staff access for basically everything they do.
So it's just right there.
It's right there, yeah.
Yeah.
And periodically we send out a mass email blast and remind everybody that exists. And we get a little kind of twist in our stomach every time we see one of those come through, because you never know what's coming. Somebody has an issue, and a lot of interesting information we've gotten that way.
No, absolutely. Having that feedback from where it's two-way feedback, it's not just from management or supervisors towards staff, but when staff are giving feedback to management, it's kind of funny because it's sort of like it hurts so good. I think that a lot of times it always sounds great, like in theory, but the practice of living that out it's uncomfortable. I mean, it's uncomfortable, the actual experience of it, and so. Yeah, that makes sense about you feel that feeling in your stomach because it's uncomfortable. You don't know what's coming down the pipeline with that. Sure.
And sometimes your knee-jerk reaction is, oh, well, they're ridiculous. That's silly. But then you have to step back and say that whether or not somebody's, in your opinion, misguided, the fact that at least one person has this perception, to somebody it is the reality, and let's do what we can to try to at least change the perception.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I noticed on your, referring back again to that, your statistics, it looked to me like your turnover rate, if I read it right, was like 37%, which seemed, compared to your super low vacancy rate, the average tenure, it seemed surprisingly high to me, just because like most of your metrics, I mean, 95% of organizations across America would love to have your numbers. I mean, they don't just happen accidentally. But what I'm saying is it seemed like an outlier. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yes, and this is actually something I've thought a lot about, because I mentioned that we lose a lot of our people within their first 6 months of employment. There seems to be this little window in that 3% vacancy rate where our turnover happens. So you kind of have this revolving door within that final 3%. And I'm sort of a geek. I'm into like space stuff. So I kind of compare it to the speed of light. It's like the closer you get up to it, the harder it becomes. It's almost exponentially more difficult to close that gap. So I really think to some degree there's just going to be this never-ending turnover within that small space. I think it could be lower than 37%, but that's where it happens. And I will also say something that I don't know that other providers will be willing to admit, but the closer you get to being fully staffed, the higher your standards become. You're scrutinize job performance more because you have the luxury of doing so, and you start to think if there's people that aren't quite up to your quality expectations, then maybe they need to step up or find their way off the team. So I think as you get closer to that fully staffed, I think you almost promote turnover to an extent, because you start identifying weaker members.
Yeah, that actually, I'm really glad that you gave insight on that, because if you're not struggling to just get coverage needs met, then you can start to get picky, and you can start to say what maybe would have been acceptable if we feel like we're just, bleeding staff and, just desperate for coverage. You could start to just up the standard and say, actually, we want all of our team members, we're going to give the Trader Joe's or the Enterprise rent-a-car experience. We're like, you have to be happy at work, not just you have to do your job, but I'm not saying that's exactly what you're doing, but it makes a lot of sense that when you have your other, it becomes, instead of that vicious cycle of turnover, you have this very happy cycle, a very positive cyclical, where the more that you have low vacancy, the more you can up the standards, which then people are even more bought in and more engaged. Am I seeing that right, you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Kind of the ugly truth is that the more desperate you are for staff, the more you're willing to overlook as far as your expectations, which is why it's all the more important to get that vacancy rate low and that turnover down as much as you can. And we don't consider our staff disposable by any means, but we do hold people to a high standard, and there's going to be a certain percentage of people that are drawn to this job because they feel like it's easy or it's a way to get a paycheck without having to work real hard or sleep on the couch. It's human nature, and so we want to identify those people, and maybe they can work somewhere else because at Core Services we expect this of you, and the people we support deserve that of the staff.
Okay, yeah. And what would you say then is your biggest, I mean, there's a lot going really well, a lot to learn here. What would you say is your biggest current staffing challenge?
Current staffing challenge. Well, there's a couple of, I don't know if I'd call it a challenge, but I'd call it growth opportunities.
Okay, yeah.
We're next to a college, so we're 5 minutes down the road from ETSU University, and somehow that seems like it would be the perfect job for a college kid where you can work weekends, night shift, you can, if you get the house clean, you can study. Well, there's not a whole lot going on. But somehow we've never cracked that nut and bridged that gap between college students and our workforce. And it seems like, there's some, I won't say none, but it doesn't seem like that's a huge portion of our DSP workforce when it seems like it should be a match made in heaven.
Okay, so you see some green space over there to try to
I've always thought
the recruitment or the
or something
relationship.
Yeah, I've always thought if you could just figure that one out, you would have all these young kids with really fresh ideas and a lot of energy. And then also you're having these people that are becoming the next managers and doctors and lawyers of the world that now have this appreciation for people with intellectual disabilities that they're going to bring to their career. It feels like a missed opportunity that we've never figured it out quite, but
yeah. Well, I'll be curious to see how that turns out over the next couple of years. Maybe that, maybe
it's a goal
maybe you
for
will,
sure.
Maybe you guys will end up cracking that code.
I hope so.
What would you say? Maybe you could tell about a time when you or your leadership team had to make a tough decision that you knew would impact your staffing. You got anything that comes to mind with that?
A tough decision that would impact staffing?
Yeah.
Well, so over the last, it's been probably 7 years now, we started doing more technology supports, remote supports. And immediately we knew that the reaction to that would be that jobs are getting replaced by technology or getting eliminated. We've done a really excellent job reallocating people, taking them from places where they're not necessarily needed or wanted, these people that would rather have independence during the night than a staff on their couch, and then using those DSPs at houses that really have the need for good staffing during the night. So, I mean, we haven't eliminated jobs. We certainly haven't done that, but that was a fear. We have seen staff that were displaced, and they had one location where they'd gotten really comfortable, and then they went to work at another location because the person they were working with decided that they could be supported with technology or supported remotely during the night. That was certainly controversial when we first started it. I think our staff have come to see the benefit of that and recognize that you're supporting somebody that really truly benefits from having the support instead of maybe somebody that could do more for themselves or be more independent than they were. That was a challenge. Yeah,
I hear you on that. One agency I've been talking to lately, they're just now implementing a lot of, in the process of implementing a lot of that enabling technology. And that is definitely one of the vibes at the agency, like people concerned about getting replaced, or some of them, maybe they're not worried about getting replaced, but it's a whole different approach and they're not sure what that's going to look like. So yeah.
Yeah, and staff can sabotage your efforts if they're not involved in the process. We made the mistake of not involving people early enough in the planning process, and so now we recognize that we involve them. And then by the end of the process, when we're ready to start rolling those programs out, they're really bought in, and oftentimes they're part of that support, but maybe in an alternate way. We utilize our own on-site remote supports, so we have third shift staff that work in homes supporting people that are also monitoring a tablet, and they're able to see alerts at the people's homes that are being supported remotely. So that's an example of a promotional opportunity. They get an extra, I think, $3 on the hour in exchange for doing that, which is it's a pretty light additional workload. And that's a way that staff see the benefit of technology as opposed to the threat.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. That makes a lot of sense. we'll kind of close it up here soon, but there's something I did want to ask. A lot of listeners are probably dealing with many challenges related to staffing, and there's many that are caught in that vicious cycle. They want to get out, and it's from all that you've learned and all your experience, what advice would you give to leaders that they're caught in that vicious cycle?
I think one of the things we did that took a little bit of a leap of faith was, before we were in this position where we had low overtime and low vacancies, we had all these shifts to fill, we had high overtime costs, and in spite of all that, we recognized that this big expensive investment in our staff in the way of all this training we wanted to do was going to pay off. So there was a couple budget years where we overspent our budget by a not insignificant amount just doing all this training that I mentioned earlier, really having faith that would ultimately pay off. And it has. But I think there's a lot of providers that they think they don't have the luxury of that because they're busy putting out fires. But if you don't figure out why the fires are starting to begin with and solve the root issue, you're going to just spin your wheels until the end of time. So I think looking forward, trusting that what you're doing is going to pay off, even if there's a short-term struggle.
Okay, that is very insightful. Yeah, so when you guys started that, it all looks great now, right? In hindsight, this worked great. But in the moment, that would have been quite a decision to make, to say, hey, we're going to hit a deficit purposefully. We're going to intentionally make a decision to invest something that we won't get the immediate return on.
Right, and we had a board that was looking at our financial statements and wondering why we exceeded our training costs by $200,000 or whatever it was. So, yeah, there's some people that will be skeptical, and you do have to have a degree of faith, I think. But I really, truly believe in that. I think if you invest now, it'll pay off and then some.
Okay. Wow, that's really neat. One last question I want to ask you is this. You are, as you said, you're fresh off this transition in your role, although with a lot of runway. I mean, it was leading up to it, so there's the plan's been there in place for quite a while. What do you think the next chapter? Now, I'm a complete outsider, so I don't even know all the ins and outs, and our listeners, most of them won't know much about core services other than this interview. But what do you think the next chapter of core services is going to look like?
We have some lofty goals. So we recently went through the third round of our CQL accreditation, the second time that we were accredited with distinction. And part of that process is developing these huge goals for the next 4 and 5 years. So I have right here next to my desk a list of all those things that we're trying to do that I look at every day so I don't forget about them. So we have a pretty good roadmap of the specifics of what we want to do. I think we have to balance that with some of the challenges and the form of, what's Medicaid funding going to look like down the road? What's the future of our funding mechanisms, and what do the future supports look like, and how's that going to happen? So a lot of good goals that'll do a lot of good, and also a lot of challenges and kind of unknowns. So I think we're going to navigate that, and I am very confident that we'll come out better than we've ever been, but it's a lot of work, and we're going to keep on doing it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share today. And there was a lot that I learned, and I'm sure our listeners are going to be very blessed and thankful for having heard from you. So thank you so much, Nick.
All right. Yeah, thanks. I appreciate you having me.
Wow. I am so encouraged and inspired by what Nick shared. I hope you are too. One thing that really stuck out to me was kind of this whole concept that the more that you build momentum by investing in your staffing, the more you can raise the standard for your new hires and get to be kind of like picky in a good way for what you expect your staff to do. The more I think about that, it's true. It's kind of obviously true. We see this in sports or performing arts, right? The better the team or the higher the level of the league, the more challenging it is to get on the team or to be in that performing arts group. So it's kind of common sense, but yet I often don't feel as though I see that as common practice within human services. But just imagine, what would it look like if that was happening at your organization? That you could just keep on getting better and better staff and being pickier and pickier in a good way of what you expected all of your staff to be doing as far as their job performance? Well, I always try to leave you with an action item, something you can implement immediately. And today's is a little different than usual. Here it is. Get connected to an outside resource that will strengthen your staffing. Now, one idea, this could look like seeking accreditation through CQL. That's the organization that Nick mentioned. And no, I'm not getting paid any affiliate commissions for suggesting that, but the fruit of their organization is pretty outstanding, as evidenced in this interview and several other interviews I've done. Or if you want to get connected to an outside resource with something that's perhaps a little bit more simple or just immediately implementable, you could look at having some or all of your supervisors go through the training that's being offered by IDD Leader. And the goal here with this training is that we turn supervisors who were never really trained on how to manage people into confident leaders who keep their best staff. Plain and simple. If you want more info on it, you can always check it out at iddleader.com. And while you're there, you may also want to pick up, there's a free playbook that I created. It's to help your frontline supervisors increase staff retention with 4 simple supervisor habits. It's a simple PDF download. It has a checklist that the supervisors can use for themselves or that you could use with your supervisors to kind of track their own progress on that. You can get it completely for free. It's at iddleader.com/supervisor. Well, that was truly a fantastic interview. I've got a lot to reflect on, and so do you, and really so much to take action on as well. So until next time, here's to you, difference maker. Keep up the amazing work.